Esther is the example for us here, then Jesus is the example of all examples of what it looks like to take bold, courageous risks to rescue people. This snapshot in Esther's life points us forward to Jesus. Esther was willing to lay down her life, but Jesus actually did lay down his life. He risked everything. It cost him everything to rescue us. Think of all the risks that Jesus took in his ministry. Throughout the Gospels, you can just think of so many countless stories where people were afraid, but Jesus models bold, courageous risk-taking. Think about the man who had leprosy, who lived in isolation for so many years, and nobody wanted to get close to him. Nobody wanted to touch him. And yet Jesus, in that moment, understood what God had put in front of him to do, and he went and touched that man and healed him. Think about in John chapter 8, the story of the woman who was caught in adultery. She's caught in the most shameful moment of her life, and all of these men pick up stones, and they're going to throw these stones at her until she dies. And Jesus, in that moment, without hesitating, puts himself in between those men with the stones and that woman caught in adultery and protects her and ministers to her in that moment. Think about Jesus in front of the Sanhedrin or Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane looking at the cross and thinking about all of what that meant. And he said, if there's any other way, let this cup pass from me. And yet what? Not my will, but yours be done. Jesus was willing to risk it all for us. And folks, if he risked it all for us, we can follow him in bold obedience no matter where he calls us to go or what he calls us to do. Amen? That's snapshot number one. All right, snapshot number two. You can just write the word representation as we look through the window into Esther's life and see how her story points us ultimately to the story of Christ. I want you to see a story of representation. We see this beginning in chapter 5. So Esther commits to go and talk to the king, and this is what she does. Chapter 5, verse 1. On the third day, Esther dressed in her royal clothing and stood in the inner courtyard of the palace facing it. And the king was sitting on his royal throne in the royal courtroom facing its entrance. And as soon as the king saw Queen Esther standing in the courtyard, here's the key moment. She gained favor with him. And the king extended the gold scepter in his hand toward Esther, and she approached and touched the tip of the scepter. The king asked her, "What is it, Queen Esther? Whatever you want, even to half the kingdom, will be given to you." And Esther replied, "If it pleases the king, may the king and Haman come today to the banquet I've prepared for them." And the king said, "Hurry, get Haman so that we can do as Esther has requested." So the king and Haman went to the banquet Esther had prepared. While drinking the wine, the king asked Esther, "Whatever you ask will be given to you, and whatever you want, even to half the kingdom, will be done." And Esther answered, "This is my petition and my request." Now, you expect here for her to plead for mercy for her people, but she actually doesn't. She punts, probably driven by fear. Instead, she says, "If I've found favor in the eyes of the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and perform my request, may the king and Haman come to the banquet I will prepare for them. Tomorrow I will do what the king has asked." Boy, I identify with that, right? Jesus, I want to follow you. I'm ready to follow you. And then the moment comes and it's like, okay, I got to put this off till tomorrow. Just a little fear here. So she says, "Come back. Give me another shot. I'll ask you tomorrow." Well, that day, Haman left full of joy and in good spirits. But when Haman saw Mordecai at the king's gate, and Mordecai didn't rise or tremble in fear at his presence, Haman was filled with rage towards Mordecai. Yet Haman controlled himself and went home, and he sent for his friends and his wife Zeresh to join him. And then Haman described for them his glorious wealth and his many sons. And he told them all how the king had honored him and promoted him in rank over the other officials and the royal staff. He added, "What's more, Queen Esther invited no one but me to join the king at the banquet she had prepared. I'm invited again tomorrow to join her with the king. Still, none of this satisfies me, since I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate all the time." And his wife Zeresh and all his friends told him, "Have them build a gallows 75 feet tall, and ask the king in the morning to hang Mordecai on it, and then go to the banquet with the king and enjoy yourself." And the advice pleased Haman, so he had the gallows constructed. Then you come to chapter 6, which we looked at last week, and you see this great epic reversal where he goes to the king, tries to get Mordecai indicted, and yet the king remembers that Mordecai is the one who had saved his life, and so he honors Mordecai rather than puts him to death. Well, fast forward to chapter 7. The king and Haman, this is the next day, they came to feast with Esther the queen. So feast number 2 here, Esther's finally going to ask him what she's been meaning to ask him. Once again, on the second day, while drinking wine, the king asked Esther, Queen asked Esther, whatever you ask will be given to you. Whatever you seek, even to half the kingdom, will be done. So Queen Esther answered, if I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if the king is pleased, spare my life. This is my request. And spare my people. This is my desire. This is the first time that Esther has revealed her identity, that she is a Jew. For my people and I have been sold to destruction, death, and annihilation. If we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept silent. Indeed, the trouble wouldn't be worth burdening the king. King Ahasuerus spoke up and asked Queen Esther, who is this, and where is the one who would devise such a scheme? Esther answered, the adversary and enemy is this evil Haman. Haman stood terrified before the king and queen, and the king arose in anger and went from there where they were drinking wine to the palace garden. And Haman remained to beg Queen Esther for his life because he realized the king was planning something terrible for him. Just as the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was reclining. And the king exclaimed, would he actually violate the queen while I'm in the house? And as soon as the statement left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. And Harbona, one of the king's eunuchs, said, there's a gallows 75 feet tall at Haman's house that he made for Mordecai, who gave the report that saved the king. And the king said, hang him on it. And they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. And then the king's anger subsided. Now, as you turn to chapter 8, I'm just going to summarize for you what happens. The king then turns to Esther and just says, basically, what do you want me to do for you now? And Esther makes the request that not only does the edict get reversed, but actually that the king gives a new order to give favor to the Jewish people, to restore all their possessions, and actually to give them the ability to exact revenge on their enemies, which is exactly what the king does. He gives her every single thing that she asks for. And what I want you to see here is I want you to feel the weight of what's happening in this moment. Because Esther is going to the king in this moment, taking this great risk, as we've talked about, taking this bold, courageous step. But when she goes into the king's court, she is carrying all of the hopes and the dreams and the prayers of her people on her shoulders. She is stepping into the king's court as their representative. If the king decides to show wrath towards the people and carry out his previous edict, not only will he kill all of her people, he'll kill her. She'll be receiving the brunt end of his wrath, and then he'll destroy all the people. Or if he decides to show favor towards her, then through her, he will show favor to all the people. Esther doesn't know how the king is going to respond. She just walks into the king's court as their ambassador in that moment, as their representative. You can almost think of her as like the substitute for her people, going to the king on their behalf. And whether for wrath or for favor, whatever happens to her will then be carried out towards her people as well. She is, in a very real sense, a mediator in this moment between her people and between the king. Now, why do I highlight that for you? I highlight that for you because I told you that the reason that Esther is in our Bible is to point us forward to a greater story. The reason that Esther is in our Bible is because we're to get a glimpse of the gospel story. Esther is the story of the gospel in miniature. And in the gospel story, we know that Jesus Christ stands as an advocate, as a representative, as an ambassador, a mediator for his people in their place in the presence of his Father. This is what is happening in the gospel. Jesus is doing his work on behalf of his people as their representative, as their substitute. Just consider Romans chapter 5 and verse 8, where Paul says that God proves his own love for us and that while we were still sinners, say this with me, Christ died for us. The word for is huper in Greek. It means Christ died on our behalf as our representative. Charles Spurgeon said that you can summarize the gospel in 4 words: Jesus in my place. Jesus goes on our behalf as our representative to do his work before the judge of all the earth. This is how 1 John chapter 2 and verse 1 puts it. My little children, I'm writing you these things so that you may not sin, but if anyone does sin, say it with me. We have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ, the righteous one. You see, in this particular moment in Esther chapter 5 and chapter 7, Esther is going as an advocate on behalf of the people. If there is wrath to be paid, she will be the one to pay it first. If there is favor to be gained, she will be the one to gain it. And this is a picture in a nutshell of what Jesus came to do for us. Jesus goes as our advocate to the Father, and he gains favor for us. I want you to think about that word favor, because you actually see it repeated throughout these chapters. You see it in chapter 4, you see it in chapter 5, you see it multiple times in chapter 7. To find favor with the king. The word favor in Hebrew is the word hen, which can be translated as grace. It is the closest Hebrew word that we have to grace in our entire Old Testament. And what Esther is doing is she is looking for grace from the king on behalf of her people, and she is looking to gain favor for her people. That is exactly what Jesus has done for us in the presence of the Father. In the gospel, Christ goes as our advocate, as our mediator, to represent us to the King of Kings, the judge of all the earth. The word advocate is a legal term. It refers to something like a defense attorney. And if you think about it, that is really an amazing way to think about what Christ has done for us, because the truth is, one day we will all stand before the judge of all the earth. And the reality is that the sentence for each and every one of us is that we are guilty. We are all guilty. We've all sinned. We've all broken God's law. We all deserve the death penalty. That's bad news. The good news, we have a defense attorney named Jesus who stands in front of us in our place as our representative, pleading our case with the Father. The reality is, one day I'm going to stand before God, and the accuser is going to point his bony finger in my direction and say, Andrew is guilty, and he will be absolutely correct. But that's not the end of the story, because Christ, as my advocate, will stand in front of me and say, yes, Andrew is guilty. Yes, Andrew is a sinner. Yes, Andrew deserves death, but he is blood-bought and paid for. And I have purchased him with my blood, and he can be welcomed into the presence of the King. Folks, this is the gospel story. And actually, so many stories throughout our Old Testament point us forward to this. You think about Moses before Pharaoh, or you think about David and Goliath. You remember the David and Goliath story where the Philistines and Israelites are facing off, and they decide to send one person on behalf of the people, and David stands in front of the people on their behalf, carrying all of their hopes and dreams on his shoulders, and he fights the battle for them in their place. And here in the Esther story, Esther is doing exactly the same thing. The hopes of the people carried on her shoulders, and she goes and seeks favor from the king for her people. Folks, this points us to the fact that Jesus gained favor for us with the Father because he bore the wrath that you and I deserved for our sins, so that God could look at us and give us grace. Aren't you thankful for that good news?